We get into that U.S.-South Africa relations standoff. Joining me for a conversation, we have Nanaya Mreku. He's an analyst as far as international affairs are concerned. A great one as well. There's a little secret I know, but I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. Nanaya, South African researcher Neo Letsoalo referred to the meeting before it happened as a tricky place to be, as make or break, and as one that will require supreme negotiations. Just give me your fundamental understanding of what happened yesterday. Donald John Trump versus, well, Cyril Ramaphosa.
Well, thank you, Ben, for having me, and good morning to your viewers. It's always good to be back here to talk about these matters with you. I think what happened yesterday was extraordinary, in my opinion, not historic, because we've seen how some of these things have gone down in the global office. But this was nevertheless an extraordinary, event, in my opinion. And I think that going to this meeting, yesterday, I think there was already tension in the air, considering the back and forth, the diplomatic row between South Africa and then United States, over what President Trump considers to be genocide, against white Afrikaners. And then also the fact that, South Africa had championed the International Court of Justice case against Israel. And this current administration of Donald J. Trump was not very happy about it. And also we have very influential people within Trump circles who also happen not to be on the good side of Cyril Ramaphosa, one of them being Elon Musk. Remember that Elon Musk has been trying to establish Starlink company in South Africa. And there is this clause that says that 30% of the company that you want to establish exactly has to be black people. And Elon Musk is not happy with that. So you could see somebody is pulling the strings with Trump's response to Cyril Ramaphosa. And you remember that the G20 that is coming up, because of these issues, United States is not wanting to be a member of not wanting to participate in G20 that is going to be hosted by South Africa. So there's a little political, and you'd also recall that U.S. aid was pulled from South Africa, I think, just some few months ago. But the most significant issue has been what Trump has been calling confiscation of land, which is what in South Africa is known as expropriation without compensation. And I think this is the land issue that is all over. It was an instrument of empire or colonialism. It's not only South Africa that is going through this phase. Zimbabwe has been through it. In fact, Ghana was lucky, that we were able to salvage the situation, in the 1897, So these are issues that are, cropping up, and it's, you'd want to find out whether what happened yesterday was towards repairing the relationship or, as you put on your screen, whether the relationship is on rocks. So I think this is a little context of what's been happening so far.
So 2 quick points on what you make mention of. One of them being, you can go back to apartheid, which ended in the 1990s, and then you can talk about how that ended. When it ended, and mind you, the Afrikaners are, their forebears were the French and the Dutch,
And the Germans, yeah.
And those as well. But if you look at how it reconstituted South African land, some 3 decades after the end, the blacks, who comprise 80% of the population, we are talking about 63 million people, own around 4% of private land, which means that the rest is in the hands of the white Afrikaners. How did that situate in the conversation? Also, on the back of the expropriation and the farmland issues?
No, I think you rightly put the whole situation in context, because the Afrikaner constitute just a fraction of the total population of South Africa, yet they control the most significant arable cultivable land in the country. So South Africa is one of the few countries that you can say that even though they have independence, right, apartheid still looms, in the corner. And you can see...
In terms of land ownership.
In terms of land ownership. And even other, indicators, if you want to go by those indicators. So there is independence, but the inequality gap is very acute. And, people have been clamoring for this kind of compensation for a very long time. They had one that was enacted in 1975, but it was not really redistributing land. And so just recently, in January 2024, is when this expropriation without compensation bill came, into implementation by Cyril Ramaphosa. And Cyril Ramaphosa was a deputy to Nelson Mandela in the ANC. So it's a long time coming. This is a bill that ought to have been passed. It was sitting on their necks. And you should also understand the political constitution of South Africa's, democracy. The ANC now is a national unity government composed of the Democratic Alliance and the Popular Front Plus. These are white Afrikaner parties. And they agreed to come together to rule the country. And these are the same people that are affected by the expropriation without compensation. But the expropriation without compensation bill is not done in vacuum. There are three things that ought to be established before you go for these lands. If the lands are unused for a very long time, and it's done on the principle of equity, it's done on the principle of in the interest of the public interest, and then it should be just. So for a long time, this reconstitution and redistribution of land has been, they have mooted the idea, or they've been tinkering the idea until 2024. And I think that it has not even taken full implementation yet. It's not really taking shape. And so this is one of the things that happened, and a few white Afrikaners have been affected. But then again, we know the geopolitics of the day, why Trump is seeking to, this is an overbeaten drum. He's exaggerating, the issue. There's one thing about Trump, and this is something I picked from Professor Lumumba. He says that Trump usually wants an apple, but he shakes the whole apple farm. So that when you come to the negotiating table, eventually he wants you down to the very apple that he wants. There is something smaller that Trump wants to do with South Africa. But you've seen how he's blown the thing out of proportion. And if you ask me yesterday, Cyril Ramaphosa was a master negotiator, if you ask me. I mean, say what you may.
It's dexterity.
Exactly. He didn't fall to the bait. He was able to regulate the diplomatic temperature, the diplomatic ambience in the room-to-room temperature, and not allow it to escalate. Elsewhere, somebody would have fallen to the bait and then confronted Trump. Trump is somebody who wants that auspicious moment to project himself as leading the narrative. So when he's uninterrupted and uninterjected, he feels in charge. And Ramaphosa gave him that,
Right.
So you would say that
there was a point where he had to be told,
yes,
allow that to go on.
Exactly.
Because some people expected a Zelensky-like bust-up.
Yes.
Which in a way was avoided yesterday.
Yes. And that's why I'm saying that he naturally is soft-spoken. He is calm and collected. If you look at his posture yesterday, I understand people are saying that why was he there in the first place? It looks like he was cozying up to Trump. But if you wanted to maintain some level of respect and not kowtow to Trump, you shouldn't have gone there in the first place. Right. But once you are there, you need to play by the books.
And speaking of playing by the books, the South African president, I'm sure if he had his way, wouldn't be there in the first place. But it's because of the crucial, sort of trade relations.
Right.
South Africa's second largest trading partner is the United States.
Right.
Then you look at the concessions when it comes to agric and the tariff-free, situation, which some senators are now saying should be scrapped by some point in this year. South Africa stands to lose a lot if the U.S. decides to cripple it. And you remember Trump was saying there are many, many ways that we can. So it was a very obvious threat, overt threat he was putting out there.
Yeah.
But Cyril Ramaphosa, navigated that pretty well, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he did. And look, we say that war is politics by other means, and so is diplomacy. Sometimes it's not only about pride, but it's for the general good of your people.
Right.
Ramaphosa spoke truth to power before coming to the White House. And even in the Oval Office, in some instances, he interrupted, and then put the facts on the ground. But he did it in such a way that it was not offensive. And at the end of the day, he was able to articulate the main reason why he was there. And I'll not be surprised that in the few days coming, this meeting would have provided some dividends to the ultimate good of South Africa. We are looking at the trade relation that he's seeking to establish. They are also looking at bilateral security arrangement with the United States, including Starlink, introduction in South Africa. So I think that by and large, there are going to be some good, there are going to be some dividends that will come out of this this meeting in the lower office in some few days. And when it does, it's a win-win situation for both Trump and for Ramaphosa. For Trump, he was, like I said, he was able to navigate and lead the conversation. On the part of Ramaphosa, he was able to be self-composed and yet put across his message. And I think that something positive, will come out. But I think that also important is how people are learning how to deal with Trump. World leaders are learning how to deal with Trump. If you want to have his ears, you don't have to be confrontational. You only have to cozy up to him and let him speak all that he wants to speak. before you make your case.
Let's talk about the veracity of some of what Trump used. And for the first time, again, another novelty. He called for the lights to be dimmed, and then we started seeing these videos, which, according to the major portals, are not exactly, in fact, they are not genuine. But there have been instances, they were put together, linked, and then put out there. Then the name of Julius Malema also came up. How did that scenario, how did you perceive that scenario? Was that a tactical approach?
Well, but you see, I keep saying that when you're dealing with Donald Trump, there's nothing that is to be expected.
Nothing is off the table.
Nothing off the table. And these are the kind of punches that you would never expect the leader of the free world to pull.
I was stunned.
You would expect diplomacy at the very top level to be demonstrated in the Oval Office. But this was a clear case. You know, some people want to call it ambush. But I think this was something that Ramaphosa himself was not expecting. You know, and you could see that he was squirming in his seat. Like, you know, he was not very comfortable when he was watching the video. But once again, he was able to rehearse what his response would be in the aftermath of the video. And I really like what he said. Without being confrontational, I think the videos, in the first instance, these are unsubstantiated videos. We don't even know where, for the ones that were in the voice of Julius Malema, I'll come to that. Right. For the ones that were in the voice of Jacob Zuma and Umkhonto Wesusue, I'll come to that. But for the pictures that he was, you know, more like throwing at Cyril Ramaphosa, these were unsubstantiated. So at one point, Ramaphosa said, I would like to see where these pictures are coming from. As the president of South Africa, he doesn't even know where they are coming from. But then again, South Africa is a democracy, right? The same way you have alt-right extremist party in the US, you know what happened in Charlottesville. Right. If you go to Germany, they have the alternate for Deutsche Party, AfD. It's extreme. This is what we call the new breed of political parties coming up. But in every democracy, it was you, J.D. Vance, who was in Germany to lecture them to allow extreme right parties to exist. So in that same vein, South Africa is a democracy. You can't.
And Cyril pointed that to him.
Yes.
He says they're a small party, but our democracy allows them.
This is freedom of speech. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa is not the one to be preaching this to US, the beacon of democracy. You can't go around arresting people just because they spoke their mind without evidence to see that it is leading to some sort of, you know, mayhem. So I think that he was able to understand, you know, the situation and then de-escalate it by responding logically and not, you know, being emotional and falling to the beat. But once again, I think that this was an unexpected development. But then again, we are talking about President Donald Trump. There's a lot of unexpected sequence of events that has happened within the past few months that you and I have been having this conversation.
And speaking of Cyril again, the tact with which he went there, he went armed himself. He knew this was going to be a bust-up of sorts. He went armed. In fact, he went armed with human resource, golfers. Apart from the gift he gave Trump, he went with golfers, Ernie Els and Retief Goosen. And he didn't just stop there. He also went with Johan Rupert, South Africa's richest man. Right. And at the point where he was being flagellated, he would tell Trump, these are white people, prominent white people in my country. If there were a genocide, they wouldn't be here.
Right. And even the Minister of Agriculture is coming from Democratic Alliance Party. He's a white person. Yeah. And they were able to enumerate a number of factors that shows that clearly there is no white genocide in South Africa. So where are you getting this information from? Where are you trying to create the impression that, of course, the issue in South Africa, I understand there is race, but those that are disadvantaged because of race is not the Afrikaners, it's black people. But the issue of South Africa is also not about race, it's about crime. South Africa has a very high crime rate. Right. And so you need to deal with the situation holistically than to, you know, behave like an ostrich and think that it is only the white Afrikaners that are, you know, in this kind of situation. And so these are, I like how he was
able to pointed that out that to him in terms of crime and other things that happen, even on the farm. Right. That, you know, because they have a situation where they don't name or they don't state a race of the person who is killed, you can't, oh, this person was black, this person was white. Though technically in some instances we've had the white farmers, but both black and whites have been affected. In fact, that situation. For me, South Africa,
it has the largest number of white settlers. You know, it was what we call settler colony. Yeah. South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya. These were colonies that white people that settled there never had intention of leaving. And so, if you look at this compensation without expropriation, I think that South Africa is handling it very well. Because if you look at what happened in neighboring Zimbabwe, what they call the Lancaster Agreement between ZANU-PF, Robert Mugabe, and then the Queen of England, that metamorphosis to something more brutal under the leadership of Tony Blair. It blew out of proportion, and then out of anger, Robert Mugabe started his compensation, and it was done in a more brutal way because he wanted to forcefully expropriate the land for black people. South Africa, I think, on the hindsight, learning from the history of what happened in Zimbabwe, is trying to be very diplomatically tasked with the situation and not have a Zimbabwe situation on their hand.
Nanaya, will the diplomacy work? Because again, I'll go back to that point, and it's interesting you brought it back up. Namibia or Botswana have also been through there, especially Zimbabwe in recent times. But South Africa, maybe, should this have been done in a better way, this land redistribution much earlier? Were there failures? Because think about it. Imagine Ghana with 80% of us, let's say maybe 26, 27 million Ghanaians, owning 4% of the land, and assuming the imperialists who had been with us before 1957 owned the rest of the land. How do you think that would have panned out?
Well, I think it wouldn't have been a very good situation, on our hand. But let me give you this brief background. You know that we nearly had a similar situation. In 1894, I recall in one of our history lessons that the British colonial administration introduced a land appropriation bill. And I've always said that it has always been an instrument of imperialism. This is how they grab land. And then our own John Mensah Saba, with our chiefs, right, and through the Aborigines Right Protection Society, were able to come to our defense and immediately started putting in clause where this land they call terra nullius. Terra nullius in international law is lands that are unoccupied. Immediately we started putting up certain projects to show that these lands are owned. So we had a different historical narrative, that unfortunately Zimbabwe and these South African countries were not, privy to. But I think that probably if it had happened to us currently, right, I'm just trying to understand how we would have done things differently, than South Africa, because they have been dealing with this situation post-apartheid for the last 30 years.
Indeed.
How are they supposed to? It's a quagmire. It's an albatross. How are they supposed to deal with it?
And if you're going to look at equity and justice, again, consider that the minority whites, they are in the minority in terms of population. They own 72% of the nation's agricultural land, prime land for production. And we're not trying to, create any black, white, but the case is, this is South Africa. It's a rainbow nation. But 72% of that prime land is in the hands of whites, and 80% of the population are managing 4%.
Well, in the first instance, I don't want to be cynical this morning, but when Desmond Tutu said South Africa is a rainbow nation, I'm really struggling to understand whether it's still a rainbow nation when the resources are heavily in the hands of
different colors.
That's what they say, one people. I'm really struggling to wrap my head around. There is a paper we wrote recently, and we were trying to look at the issues within South Africa, US, and India, and try to draw out countries that say that they are really a post-racial society, but racism is still at the core of such societies. Yeah. And so I think that Ramaphosa is doing the best he can, and even in the presence of power, he's just trying to say that expropriation bills are not only unique to South Africa. Even US has it. In some instances, Ghana is reclaiming public lands that are in the interest of the public, that are in the hands of individuals. It's in the law. So there's a way we can reclaim our lands. Maybe you need to listen to people that are close to you and are also South Africans. Maybe they will tell you the truth.
Okay. But so if you look at it, there is racist land inequality in South Africa, just not the way Trump and Musk are painting it. But in our context, what lesson could we learn from what is happening there? They have their tariff, agreement now, 30% on hold, but they stand to lose more compared to our 10%. What lessons can we pick from them?
Well, I think in the first instance, we need to understand that the demographic distribution is different. The reason why South Africa is going through what they are going through is because of the mixed race and how that laid a complex, foundation for apartheid. We on this side of the continent, in this country, at least, we are not going through that kind of complex racial disparity differences between white and black. So I think that that is something that plays in our interest. We don't have white minority here having a disproportionate amount of our resources. It's still in the hands of black people here. But I think that going forward, what we can learn, in my opinion, is how to be responsive, right, to the needs of people. that even if you have some of these bills, even if you have some of these policies into reclaiming the land, how do we make sure we do it in a way that it doesn't, give us a blowback? It doesn't, blow us back in our faces, and it doesn't also antagonize people that are heavily invested in the country, so they move away with their investment. Diplomacy is very, very important, and so even if you have to talk to people, negotiation, dialogue to de-escalate the situation is always important, in my opinion. Diplomacy is key in this kind of issues.
Nana, we're grateful for your time. I'm sure this will keep blowing, this air, this breeze of U.S.-South Africa relations will keep blowing. But Nana Mreku is an analyst of international affairs. He has a focus on Africa as well, and he joined the conversation. But let's take...